We'll make a start. Welcome and thank you for coming to Caversham Picture Framer for our Christmas Meet the Artist event. If you're new to the gallery and you want to know more about events that are going to happen in the future, please sign up to our newsletter. You can talk to Lydia or me and we'll sign you up. We've got some events coming up. We've got tomorrow, we've got Inky Holidays. If anybody wants to do something creative and make a Christmas card, there's still space left. It's with our resident artist. It's her last event in the print club behind us. And we're doing for tonight, anybody who would like to do that, 20% off the ticket price, and it will start at 1 o'clock tomorrow. So if you don't have a Christmas present yet, that would be a good opportunity. We've also got coming up in February the wine tasting, which was supposed to be happening a couple of weeks ago and had to be cancelled. So it's exactly the same setup. So it's with my sister Emma Foster, and she'll be talking about 6 different Spanish wines from across Spain, and you can buy the tickets online for that. So the exhibition this evening is all Kate Findlay's work. It's an absolutely fabulous display showing all the seasons, and I think best probably to pass over to Kate to explain how on earth she does it.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. It's really nice as an artist to have the chance to see a body of your own work up, actually, and then you sort of kind of see it differently sometimes, and just puts it all in perspective. I've basically been a full-time artist since 2018 now, but I was starting this work much earlier, certainly around 2012. And at that point I just completed a large series of large art quilts based on the Large Hadron Collider. So very, very different. So if you know your science, you'll know that that's couldn't really be much more different than what you're seeing here. But when I finished it, I thought I need a change. And I started doing what were called journal quilts, which were tiny pieces of, well, they're tiny quilts if you like, with 3 layers as a quilt is. But I chose birds as a subject, and I really enjoyed it. And I then thought I could see myself doing more of this sort of work. So that's sort of where it started, and that was all in fabric. And things kind of just grew and grew from there. One of the things I did with that was when you're making that sort of work, what I was thinking was, well, how can I sell it? And one of the things is to have work licensed. And so if you have it licensed, then you can have it printed by companies and put onto products. So it could be greetings cards or something else. So these, the wintry ones particularly that you see in here, were designed really as greetings cards. So I made the piece and then they were photographed to become greetings cards. But of course things developed, so that was sort of one way I went with the work, and then others was just wanting to produce artwork in its own right to go on the walls. What I have noticed is that my work has just changed quite a lot over the years. So the earlier pieces were much simpler, and gradually they've got more and more complex, and they've got more things going on in them, and they've got more layers, and they've got more techniques, and they've got a lot more stitching. So how do I make them? Basically what I'm doing is I start with, I've got just a few, these are sort of examples for teaching and all the rest of it. So some of these are older pieces. I start with felt. So the back of my work is never tidy, but basically I'm using felt. So that's my base layer. Then I use something called Wonder Web, which is a fusible glue which you iron on, and then you put a layer of fabric on top. So that's my, if you like, setting up my canvas, is starting with my 3 layers. Then I'm printing and whatever else, collaging on top. So the other thing to say is that I dye a lot of my fabrics. They're down here somewhere, they've disappeared. Here we are. What makes my work unique is the fact I dye fabrics. So this is my colour palette. I am dyeing fabrics which I cut up and then collage into the work. And this is dyed, it's cotton poplin, and it's dyed with something called Procyon dye. And what you do is you scrunch it all up and then you pour the dye on. And because it's scrunched up, you get random marks on the fabric. And I use that with, I really push the effects as much as I can, so that I'm getting really quite random sort of effects. And you can just see a whole range of pieces here. And this sort of thing particularly is useful where I've then deliberately dyed pieces where I might have it going from light to dark, for example, so I can control what I do with the dyeing. Once I've dyed it, I might just collage onto it, or I might use some paint techniques. So, for example, here, I've then started using stencils and stamps. So I would then use fabric paints, specific fabric paints. They're not ordinary acrylics, they're designed for fabric. And I would stencil and stamp bits and pieces onto my background. Once I've done that, then I would collage on top. And when I collage my fabric, so I'd then be using pieces like this, I'm cutting them up. And what I would do is I would then bond with another fusible glue on the back, cut the shapes out, put them in position, and you iron them down. And the glue melts, and so the pieces are then held ready for stitch. So that's kind of basically what I'm doing with all the work. However, there are other techniques. So for example here, this one, this is something called confetti. And that's where you cut up tiny pieces of fabric and you sprinkle it on. I painted the background first with fabric paints for this sort of picture. Sprinkle the confetti on, and then you use a very fine net. So this is called tulle, T-U-L-L-E. And you put the tulle over the top. And you can go around and see if you can spot it. It's not on all the pictures, but it is on some of the pictures. And sometimes it's on bits of pictures, but not all of it. But that is a really useful technique for getting lots of small, pointillist sort of type effects onto the picture. So as I said, then covered with the tulle.
How do you hold the tulle down?
So the tulle then, I would then stitch on top. So generally, once I've got all that in place, I'll pin it to death to hold it down, and then I would stitch. Now what's important for me now is that the machine I've got is an industrial machine. And it was actually designed as a quilting machine, so it's got a very big flat bed and the machine is mounted that way rather than sideways. But it's very powerful, and it means that I can stitch through lots and lots of layers. Whereas with the earlier work, I found that actually after about 5 layers, it starts complaining. But now I can probably stitch through 8 or 9 layers and it's fine. And it's just really strong. So it's actually had the effect of changing what I do, and I now find that I actually stitch a lot more as a result, because it's a more pleasant experience actually. So it's just nicer to be able to stitch. And then sometimes with pieces, so I've got little bits of confetti in some pieces, here, I've got some printing here, I've got some collage there, and sometimes I will add hand stitch. So this, again, it was a sample, it's a workshop sample piece, but that's got some hand stitch happening in it too. I have to say I'm not a great hand stitcher. I use a bit, mostly French knots if I'm going to do anything, but I might then just embellish a piece with a bit of hand stitching. So those are really, that's the armoury of my techniques. That's what I'm using to create my pieces. And it's just variations on those. Finishing off, when you finish a piece, because it's just loose floppy fabric, what's important is that you stretch it. This is just a kit. I've just brought it because it's stretched onto a board. So when you've finished the piece of work, it needs to be mounted onto a board. And then with this one I added extra fabric, and then you lace it across the back so that it's absolutely as tight as it can be, and that way you get a lovely smooth surface ready for framing. Because if you just put a piece of fabric into a frame, it would just gradually sag. So it's really important that it's prepared before it goes off to be framed. But that's effectively what I do before I finish them off.
We also do that.
Yes, that's it, yes, yeah. You can give your moment straight over to Alex and he will do that for you. But yes, I tend to prepare my work like that. What else have I got there? That's a couple of other. Sometimes when I'm doing pieces, I'm into wintry pieces here. With these, I might add extra things like little sparkly bits. In fact, what this is, the thing that's creating the sparkle in that, is something called spiderweb tulle, and so it's just a different sort of fabric. And here also, in the background of this one, there are a lot of organza type fabrics, and organzas are great in that you can create lots of layers with them, so you get quite, almost like watercolour effects. So it's just a mixture of techniques, it depends what I'm doing, what effect I'm wanting to get, but these are all techniques that would go into the work depending on the outcome. The two pieces over by Alex actually on the wall, again, the bulk of those is collage, but actually there's a bit of screen printing in that as well. So having done the collage, I've then used some screens and I've actually screen printed onto the surface just to add more texture and interest as well as the collage. So that's another variation on what I'm experimenting with at the moment. But beyond that, I think everything else, it's just variation. So as I said, these little ones, very much you've got a mixture of the painted techniques in the background and then the collage. These were pure collage, nothing else in those at all. But these actually, a different side of things, were inspired by, they were a place, it's the Blackwater River actually, not so far from here. I took the photos, but I also used my iPad a lot in my design work. So once I've taken my photos, I then run them through a program on the iPad, which stylises them. And unfortunately, the program I use won't let me do this anymore, which is really annoying because I particularly like the way it stylised it. So I then, I've got my sort of next stage picture, and then I took it a stage further in terms of how I collage the pieces together. So that the iPad is actually another design tool I use in my artwork. For two reasons. One, doing that sort of thing, and also actually, if I just find that piece over there, let me grab that. Thank you. This is another variation where the background started life as a piece of dyed fabric that I then printed onto it. I then photographed it, put it onto the iPad and stylised it on the iPad, then sent that off to be printed. So I then had fabric printed, and I have a lot of my own fabric printed actually, and then I've then gone back and worked into it. So that's a sort of another variation on what I do, because I do actually have quite a lot of my own fabric printed these days.
Can I ask how long it would take you to do the whole thing then from scratch? If there's all those different elements to it.
Yeah, it's always hard to think, oh gosh, you've done this and that to it. I mean, probably, I suppose if I'm honest, it might be about a day and a half if I actually really sat there and did it all.
That sounds relatively quick for all those processes.
But I suppose it's kind of knowing the processes, isn't it, and how I work.
You're still going to be creative at the same time.
Yeah, that's it. So small pieces might not take too long, but the bigger ones, they can take a week or more. It just depends on complexity and what I'm doing. So between, sort of a day to 2 days, up to 6 or 7 days even on a piece. But rarely much more than that. So that's the sort of time frame. But anyway, so I think that covers most of the techniques. If you want to see a few more of the techniques, I've got 2 self-published books, and the confetti. If I just find the page there, I'll just show you. So making the confetti. So what I do there is I just have 2 or 3 pieces of fabric that I put down onto a board, and then I cut it with a rotary cutter in 2 directions, so you can actually cut quite a lot of the confetti at one time. So I'm not sitting there snipping individual pieces of fabric, I'll tell you that now. So that's how I create the confetti. But there are some of the techniques, and also a bit about the dyeing further back as well. But I think that's kind of really most of the techniques. So I don't know if you know, there are any other questions, particularly on any of that you'd like to ask. If not, stunned into silence. That's how I like it.
As when you say you're stitching,
Yes.
do you have a computer stitcher that you give it the picture and you ask it to stitch in a particular way, or do you have to literally manually stitch it with the machine?
So what it is, it's called free motion stitching. With most domestic sewing machines do free motion. As I said, my big, more industrial one does the same. In fact, my industrial one only does one stitch, straight stitch. Right. So it effectively only does free motion. But what's different about free motion stitch compared with normal stitching, if you were sewing curtains or clothes, you have two pieces of fabric and then you have what's called feed dogs underneath, the little teeth. And it grabs the fabric, and so it pushes it through and keeps it going in one direction. With free motion, you take the feed dogs down, and then you hold onto the fabric, and you just move the fabric around where you want it to be.
That's why I was wondering how you did that.
That's it.
Yeah.
So you are then using the sewing machine as a drawing tool, and that's the you know, a completely different way of working with the sewing machine.
You haven't computerised it.
It's not computerised at all. No, I every single stitch I put in where I want it to be.
Wow.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, but I'm literally moving it backwards and forwards and round, and you know, and just drawing with it.
Wow.
Which is a very different way of working. But yeah, I found it just works for me, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? With whatever you do as an artist, it's finding what works for you and then refining that technique. Yeah. But yeah, that's basically it. So,
Wait, you said those ones there were done with based on pictures.
yes.
But not all of these are done like that, are they? So
No, they do vary. I mean that one was a combination. I'd taken quite a few pictures actually as reference for that. So I've always wanted to do rose bay willow herb, and I just then sort of put the composition together. But it was based on photos I'd taken, but I composed it.
Right.
Those were fairly true to the original photos, but sort of stylised. The smaller ones often are sort of made up, you know, for want of a better term. So they grow organically. So I would just start with my printed background and see where it takes me very often, and then look at it and think, what do I think works on that? What colours do I want? What birds do I want if I want birds? You know, I might have a rough idea of where I'm going, but not a very definite one. The two over there were Solemn Woods, which is near Pangbourne. And what else? These ones. This one was actually the conker tree was the conker tree inspired by the conker tree at Gray's Court in the car park, but the rest of it was actually a sort of fantasy, if you like. It was kind of composed, just made up. And the same with those two. They were more they grew organically. So it just depends. You know, pieces work in different ways. Some I have quite a strong idea of what I want to do. Others I just, you know, I've got a rough idea of where I want it to go, and then I will allow it to be much freer in the way it comes together. So it, you know, it just depends. I think there's two ways of working, and there is something quite nice about letting it grow organically. You know, because then you can then go with that and go, oh, I just want these colours to be stronger, or I need another tree or something, you know, instead of like thinking, well, that was the view. The one over there with the greenhouse, Micklam's Farm, so that is inspired by Micklam's Farm, which is on the A4. And they do have that greenhouse. In fact, I changed that because I wasn't happy with the bottom left-hand corner, and I did change the picture. But it was inspired by a real place, you know. So yeah, it just depends, you know, on what, you know, what the inspiration is really. So but yeah, mixture. Anything else? Any other questions particularly, or anything you'd like to know? No, that's good. I've done my job in that case, I think.
Yeah.
I hope. So, but thank you.
Brilliant.